What's going on, everybody? This is State of Exile, episode 53, The Prophetic Visions, with Chris Wilson himself. You know, Chris, we just had you 2 episodes ago, and this is the 7th time you've appeared on our show. I think you're starting to like coming here, huh?
Yeah, I'll gradually make it a permanent thing.
Okay, wow, shoot. Better watch out. We were just talking about Reddit, throwing things, better watch out. Reddit's going to keep you to that. So what do we got going on today? Everything Prophecy. We're not going to really talk about too much Brandis and things like that. Today is Prophecy, patch 2.3 with the top dog himself, Chris Wilson. Without further ado, Ziggy, let's kick things off.
Yeah, sure thing. I thought we'd start things at the beginning with the Prophecy reveal and talk about the initial design of Prophecy and have you walk us through the process a bit, because we basically, it's like this is only a couple days after the initial reveal and we have just the initial posts, so kind of like outlining what things are like, but wondering if you could give us a bit more detail on how that whole process goes. How do you get the prophecy? What's it like to get that coin, go turn it in? How do you get that? How do you manage that? Do you mind walking us through the process?
Sure, not a problem. Would you prefer to first hear about how the League came together in terms of design,
yes,
or do you want the quick... Okay, because I could give the quick overview
yes.
of how it works in English in case some people didn't understand it from the post.
I reckon start off with how it came together, how it came to be.
Great. Okay, so we have a list of future leagues that we want to do. There's, some detail in each one. And an example of how Prophecy started on that list was it was designed to be a small league. And we've got small and large leagues. Large ones are ones like the Prophecy you guys have now, where they're released by themselves and there isn't an accompanying expansion, whereas small leagues are ones that go alongside an expansion. And the intention is that the expansion content pads out the size of the league, so overall there's a lot of stuff for players to do, and we have to release larger leagues when there's no expansion to go with it. So Prophecy was initially a small league idea, and the basic idea was that it came from the pain point that if you want to do a master mission, you can't predict when it's going to be. And we thought, well, what if you have the ability to find prophecies as you play through the game, which are these scrolls or something, and then you have the ability to apply them to the next area. So for example, you've got some challenge that says, kill a monster with 3 tormented spirits, and you're thinking, sweet, well, normally I have to wait for 3 spirits randomly, but here I can get the spirit prophecy and just apply it to my next area, truck on in there and kill the monster and get the challenge completion. Or, I want to grind Haku, so I'll just apply the Haku prophecy, each time I get it to every area. So we had this idea, and that was basically as far as it went. People liked deterministically finding these game concepts, and we realized that if we wanted to pad it out, we could add some more content to it, and it just sat on the list like this for quite a while. So when it came to doing the League after Brandis, we had our heart set on doing a different one from the list that is really awesome that we may do next or may do later this year or something. And we realized that there was quite a lot of stuff here that we had to sort out with the itemization for this other league. Like, it had a lot of potential to be the best thing ever, but it just required a lot of design process, and the particular designers that would work on that were busy finishing Parandus. And so we thought, well, why don't we put that one on later, and we'll just make Prophecy, change it from a small league to a large one by adding character to it and adding a ton of new content in the form of prophecies. And during this design process, we needed theming, and we settled on the idea of a soothsayer rather than you just having these scrolls that you find without a character to give them to you. And that's where the silver coin idea came from. Mechanically, the League had to change a bit because the idea of just applying a prophecy to the next area you enter is really clunky for players. Like, it just wasn't working. You have to, you right-click it, and then the next area you enter has the prophecy. That's a bit weird. Or maybe you have it so that you have a stone at the beginning of each area transition that you put the prophecy in and hit go, and it spawns an area with that. This was also kind of strange. It wasn't really intuitive to have it that you had to manually apply the prophecy to an area. It was also a bit abusive, because then you could completely control exactly which area had, all monsters are magic or whatever it is. So the idea of having it so that there's a prophecy list in a screen is something Jonathan came up with, where there are a bunch of prophecies that affect you, and they all will come true at some point in the near future, and the game tries hard to make sure they affect the right kind of areas where they can come true. And so that gave birth to the idea of there being the 7 prophecies told about your character at any one time. And so mechanically, the way the new version works is as you play through the game, you find silver coins, roughly 1 an area at the moment. If you full clear the areas, of course, you're more likely to find more per area, and if you skip through most of them...
how does that work in particular? Because that's something that's been a bit of subject of debate for me in particular, was Is it like a guaranteed one per area, or is it something that just on average, if you're full clearing zones, you're going to find one per area? Because this sort of thing can, if it's like guaranteed per area, it can lead to like zone reset farming, for example, where you're finding the coin and then resetting the zone and doing that same zone again until you find the next coin, then resetting.
The short answer is that it's not guaranteed as an average, but the long answer is that we have a mechanism for doing a relatively low variance way of spawning stuff once per area, where it'll roll on there being 0, it'll roll on there being 1, it'll roll on there being more than 1. And we use this in things like Talisman and Domination, for shrines and so on, and Talisman affected monsters, where it does, if you are searching up most of the area, you do feel your 1 on average, but like in Talisman, I got 5 per area once just by luck, so
Okay.
it's lower variance than purely just saying the monsters have a 0.0000x% chance to drop the item, but it certainly isn't a guaranteed thing. It does mean that you don't have to full clear the areas. You can play normally and get a normal rate of prophecies from the silver coins.
Gotcha.
So
how did... Yeah,
Sorry,
go
go on.
Continue.
I was just going to say, upon finding the silver coin, if you take it to Navali, she'll add a prophecy to your list. Now, it's worth stressing, this is a random prophecy, right? Like, the league doesn't just let you pick the best one repetitively. You get a random prophecy from the set available at that level. So, for example, if there are prophecies that involve going to the fetid pool and you're level 22, you're not going to get that prophecy because it's kind of silly to backtrack to a level 3 area. So as you play through the game, the set of prophecies available to you fluctuates depending on where you are, and also based on which prophecies you've done in the past, because they chain together.
Okay, so the prophecies actually take into account, whether you're at endgame or whether you're leveling, and there's different sets of prophecies for those things.
Certainly. In fact, some prophecies are restricted to lower difficulties. For example, let's say we had a prophecy that says, kill a unique monster, get a unique item, right? Well, unique monsters are trivial. You go to the Mudflats and kick Ooze Black Bloom a couple of times, right? The Rare Preservation Society would hate it, but there's your unique item. And so that one, for example, if you get it in normal difficulty, you can only use it in normal difficulty, meaning the most abusive unique you can get is like 35 or 40 or whatever normal difficulty goes up to. And so because of that, we can make it relatively common. I mean, obviously it's not too common, but we can make that kind of thing more common because people don't just itemize them, save them up, and then go and kill Core Malachi and have full access to, every single unique in the game.
Does this also mean that, like, for endgame purposes, if someone's trying to complete, like, the prophecy challenges, I would assume these are part of it, that this also creates an economy for the lower level player to sell to the higher level players because they pass that content too quick?
They certainly can trade both coins and prophecies to high level players, and the coins especially I think will be something where there'll be a few low level players who don't want to engage with prophecy just yet, and they're getting a pile of coins. Unlike Parandus coins, which did scale up a bit towards the end game, you were finding larger piles. Here you get the same rate of silver coins for Navali throughout the game.
All right, cool.
The fact that you can trade these prophecies as well seems to take into the account that you might do a set of challenges to do those prophecies, because now rather than having to do this awkward trade chat, like a 1 coin to 1 prophecy sort of deal, or different prophecies cost different coins, or...
Because you don't get to choose, it is 1 coin per prophecy. So every coin is a prophecy, and that means you can keep your list pretty through that. So I don't doubt there will be challenges related to prophecies in this league. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if half of them were. I haven't seen the list myself yet, but we are conscious of the fact that people don't necessarily want to have to grind currency to complete the challenges.
Okay. So how much coins are these prophecies? Is it like a 1 coin to 1 prophecy sort of deal, or different prophecies cost different coins, or...?
Because you don't get to choose, it is 1 coin per prophecy. So every coin is a prophecy, and that means you can keep your list pretty full. Currently, the price for itemization is 3 coins. So people on Reddit have speculated that the insane ones might be 1,000 coins. I mean, maybe,
Yeah.
but at the current version of the game we're playtesting, it's 3 coins. Now, this could be totally different by release. We're knee deep in the playtesting stage where we play through and say, is 3 right? How about 6? How about 2? That kind of thing. So the intention is that were you to itemize something, the cost is the rarity of finding it, not the number of coins it costs to itemize.
Gotcha, because... Yeah, you mentioned the one your next 6 socket is now 6 linked when it happens. That at a cost of 3 coins to itemize that's pure profit if you sell that then at that point.
Certainly, but then you didn't get to use it yourself. So yeah, your character gains when it's allocated to you randomly, like many things in the game. Like if you're playing in a Shavs drops, you just randomly allocated something good for yourself.
Yeah, gotcha.
Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't.
Right. So this version of Prophecy that we've ended up with is maybe 10 times larger in scope than the one we were initially planning as a small league, because we've added a ton of character. Navali's there. She has a lot to talk about. All of the prophecies currently. Our intention is to voice act every single prophecy. We'll see how that pans out logistically over the next few weeks, but it's currently the goal. This is the kind of thing people will hold me to, I'm sure.
I mean, that's a big undertaking. How many? You said like 150-ish or up to 150?
Yeah, there's something around there. I mean, obviously it fluctuates. They're adding more each day, and they're removing bad ones each day, so it fluctuates a lot. In addition, we have quite a lot more interesting stuff going on with the prophecies, because the initial plan for it involved just taking existing game content and saying, here's a way to access it. You know, if you want your Tormented Spirits or Rogue Exiles or, you know, potentially talismans and stuff like that, there are prophecies for them. Now, with the current version, half of the content is new. There's encounters, they've made, like, you know, end boss fights, there's new areas you can go to for it. There's a lot of interesting stuff that occurs.
So one of the things that Prophecies can do was the uniques. You could change how uniques are. You listed a couple on the website, such as, you know, the Wall of Brambles, the Bramblejack, one of the biggest jokes of all time, now is pretty freaking serious at level 30. I was wondering if you have any more of these uniques you might be able to disclose with us.
So we have a list. Now, what's worth noting with these is that it's still in the playtesting stage for them. So some of the things are on the list because they're intended to go into the game like that. Some of the things are in the game right now as this, but they could all completely change. And I have permission to read some of these out to you guys with the caveat that if it doesn't go in the game, well, that's just because they changed their mind, right? Like, we know we're doing the Wall of Brambles one. Right. We know we're doing the Wall of Brambles one because we've put it on the website, so we have to do that one now. But this is the kind of sneak peek, unofficial thing.
Wait, Chris.
Unofficial.
Let's keep the suspense real. How did Wall of Brambles come to be? Let's just do that first. Let's hear this story first.
I am curious about the design process that went into which uniques get upgraded and how do they get upgraded.
So the method for upgrading these, for people who missed the announcement on that, is that some of the prophecies say that you're going to slay some foe in the game while wearing a specific item that's loosely themed around that foe. For example, the example we gave is the King and the Brambles, where you have to kill Duresso while wearing Bramblejack. And as you know, Duresso, being a hopeless romantic, has a bit of a roses/thorns theme, as well as all the swords. So the intention is that Bramblejack fits him. So wearing one of these low-level bad uniques is a handicap unto itself. Like killing Duresso while wearing Bramblejack isn't as easy as killing Duresso while wearing Belly of the Beast. So it's a bit of a handicap, but upon completing it, then it upgrades the unique into the Fated version, which is exactly the same, but has an additional property or two that differentiates it from the low-level one, ideally making it feel completely different. You know, for example, converting all of its damage to another type or whatever. And in the Wall of Brambles case, it's exactly the same as Bramblejack, but with plus 2,000 armor. And so, of course, this makes it a bit more relevant, you know, your level 30 characters actually wanting to use that item as opposed to laughing at it for being a level 1 unique. And in the case of, the thing I like about the Bramblejack case is that 40% melee damage reflection on it is actually relevant once the armor is functionally protecting you, whereas it's kind of a slap in the face if it's on a level 1 unique, because you don't need damage reflection on the Twilight Strand.
Now, how did you guys decide upon, you know what, 2,000 armor is it? Was there any other design process before that? Before you decided 2,000 armor?
So for that one, the initial goal was plus 10,000% armor, because it seems like a crazy number. And when you do the math, it works out to a relatively fair value. The problem is that doing the math on that is actually a bit of a pain. Like, it begs the question of how much armor is that? And the result was a relatively disappointing number. So we picked 2,000, which was a higher number. Also because it means that quality, I've been told quality affects it. Now, I haven't checked this myself. It's one of those things where, you know, I get told quality affects this, and then if the person's wrong, then I say, oh, yeah, of course it's affected by quality. We're stuck in a bad situation. But anyway, the random guy at work who was telling me about this armor says that quality affects it. So it should mean that you can actually get 2,400 or so armor on the Wall of Brambles, which makes it even more useful.
Juggernauts. Where's my Juggernauts in chat?
Zeno is excited.
Oh, man.
Yeah, well, the higher versions of these uniques aren't intended to be endgame best in slot stuff, but they're intended to be useful. You know, it's something that you'll actually consider using in your pool of better items later on. And it provides an interesting twist on something you're already used to with an additional property that makes it kind of interesting.
So before you give us some examples then, what was the goal with these upgrades? Like, was it to make low-level uniques viable at endgame? Was it to bring underused stuff to the front? Was it thematic reasons? Like, how did you guys decide upon the list of things that would get upgrades?
So, obviously the things that get upgraded have to be things that we think aren't useful at the end game, right? Things that are aimed at lower players, that are doing their job for lower player items, and there could be a useful higher version of. Now, it's worth noting here, we don't want to just target, like, we don't want to target bad uniques that actually need work, right? Like, if we provide this upgraded version of something, it kind of implies that in the next 3 months, we're not improving that unique for the sake of it. So we haven't targeted the worst uniques in the game, because maybe some of the worst uniques are going to get balance improvements to actually be better. So we're targeting ones that we think are fine where they are. You know, things like Silver Branch, for example, that serves a great purpose. It's a good twinking bow. You love to find that in a race. No one's unhappy with Silver Branch, except it's only designed for low-level players. So now there's a higher version of Silver Branch, which is useful for medium-level players. And as far as I know, none of this stuff is targeted to be great and amazing for, you know, level 80+ characters. I believe it's just so that when you're playing through the game, you have the item become a lot more useful later. Having said that, whenever you add mods to uniques, of course you're accidentally breaking everything and making, you know, some really, really powerful best-in-slot item. Especially because there's stuff on here like your physical damage can chill as a property that's added to Carton Hold. At least in the document so far. And that kind of thing could be relevant. There might be a build that really wants to use chilling physical damage for what it wants to do, and this is the way now.
Interesting. Slip that little example in there. Very nice.
So,
do you have a... Yeah, go ahead, Zeno.
I want to hear this list. I just want to hear all of them. Like, just let's hear it, Chris.
He said he has a list. Come on, Chris. The suspense is enough.
I have a document in front of me with an awful lot of these. Now, I was given... The ones I was told to mention were Springleaf, changing to the Oak, and they say that it adds 120 life to Springleaf if you kill Oak. So that's the first example. So it's pretty similar to the existing Springleaf. Whatever motivates you, wear that, except there's 120 life. So, you know, it's a trade-off between that and other items.
What the heck?
So we have Calm's Sign changing to Calm's Path. Now, as you know, Calm's Sign is a ring which fiddles with your endurance charges. And Calm's Path, upon killing Calm, the current note on this is X% of maximum life regenerated per second per endurance charge. So they haven't filled in the value of X there. We don't know what it is. It could be low. I mean, I'm not expecting 1%.
Could be 0.01.
Who knows? But the guys are working on it. And that means that if your endurance charge character, which had to use some Calm Signs early on, now completes the Calm Prophecy, the Calm Signs might be useful later on as well because of this life regen.
That's an awesome one. That's
Like,
awesome.
stack that with the Chieftain and the endurance charge note on the tree, you're getting some serious life regen per endurance charge. And now that ring isn't
I mean, even
fodder.
if it's like 0.2, that's still going to be a lot.
Yeah, that's a ton. That's awesome.
So these items aren't necessarily the best in the game. Like the upgraded Silver Branch is currently aiming at basically delegacying it. It makes it back to +2 levels rather than +1. And that, like the broken Silver Branch in the past wasn't breaking the end game, it was just breaking, you know, levels 1 through 40 for twinking. So it's basically saying your twinking bow is back, though obviously with the level requirement, because the level requirement goes up when you get these additional mods on them. Probably worth mentioning that. For example, the Wall of Brambles jumped up to level 30, so it's not intended to make it 80+. But many of these, of course, will be new options for higher players. The next example on my list is that Craghead becomes Cragfall. Where is this one? There we are. So Craghead to Cragfall requires you to slay Nice, the rock elemental in Act 2. And this one says attacks that stun cause bleeding.
Oh, wow.
That might add new options.
Gladiator. Oh, that's really good stuff.
So there's a bunch of
Some
others.
Slayer love potentially as well.
Let's not go too far now. We haven't heard anything about Slayer from Chris yet.
Okay, so Queen's Decree goes to Queen's Escape, which requires killing something in the Imperial Gardens. They're still having a think about it, potentially Thistle Sage as the target for that one. And plus 40% minion movement speed is currently the mod they're targeting on Queen's Escape.
Cool.
So that was previously a minion item, now it's a minion item where they're faster. So those are the ones that I was told, yeah, mention these, they're cool. The other ones, I mean, there's a giant list of things on here which look pretty exciting. The problem is, I suspect they're less ready with the mods on these, so I'm digging more of a hole to mention those.
These
All
are
right.
some insane
Pretty cool.
changes.
Pretty cool little teaser. I especially like how with these, like the killing Nice with the Craghead. Like you've definitely got some like cool, like fun little encounters that suit the theme of the item. I'm a fan of that.
Does this mean that we can actually go to the Dread Thicket now, rather than it just being a patch note?
There'll be a prophecy
Chris?
for the Dread Thicket. It sounds like Zeno.
A conditional one.
It works for me.
I like it. I like it.
So we're pleased with the system, especially because these items will be stuff you can keep from the league afterwards. I mean, while we're trying not to communicate which League elements are going to be wrapped into the core game after a League ends, especially because in this case, we want to actually see what people think of it. So, for example, Talisman and Perandus both aren't in standard in any form yet. Now, they both will be at some point in the future in various forms, I'm sure, because it's content we want to keep using. We just have to find the right time and the right way to do it. And we've kind of hit the point where there's a little bit of saturation with the amount of that stuff we've put in the game, so we do have the luxury of holding some of the stuff back for special events in the future. And the same may be true for Prophecy, where potentially when Prophecy ends, there's no more prophecies in the game, and these items, you won't be able to get them anymore. Or maybe it's something that we could wrap into the game potentially, and then you have more access to these items. But they are something that persists outside of Prophecy.
So before we go in the next section, you don't have to share any of the information, but can you just reveal one of the uniques on the list that is most likely getting a change?
Without, do you mean? Oh, without saying what?
Yeah, without
he wants
saying
to
what
hear
it is.
something that is. Yeah, that might not work.
You want to hear something? I can give you an example. There's a lot of uniques being considered here, like Limb Split and the Screaming Eagle. Many of the unique jewels.
Veil of the Night.
Chalice of Horrors. Veil of the Night is on the list, but it doesn't have any notes next to it. It just says Veil of the Night and literally nothing.
Question mark?
Who knows? That's exactly the kind of thing which they might just not do. They might get to it and go, we didn't have any good ideas. Or maybe they do.
Veil of the Night is now usable.
So Brightbeak's on the list, Stormcloud, Hrimnor's Hymn. There's a lot of stuff which hopefully we'll see some pretty awesome versions. And the nice thing about these uniques is because they use the same art, it's just the balance testing that's required to get them in. So there could potentially be quite a lot of them.
Yeah, it's like we're essentially getting a whole bunch of new uniques here that you guys don't have to, wait through the whole process of designing all the art for and everything.
Though they are being careful, because when they're looking at bad uniques, as in by bad uniques, I mean ones that people just throw in the trash and don't use on high-level characters. When they're looking at those items, there are many that they look at and go, we need to fix this one. And then they can't include it on this list if that's the case, because you can't really have a buffed version halfway through the league or that kind of thing. So I believe that there is an effort underway, which may not be in the Prophecy launch, but maybe later on, to make sure a lot more uniques in the game are relevant and not quite so trashy.
And I can't even imagine the challenge that someone would have to complete with Veil of the Night on. Good luck.
Call him out. Double call Malachi, Veil of the Night.
Shock and horror.
Oh, man.
Nice,
That's good stuff right there. All right, Ziggy, so you want to take us in the next segment?
Yeah, sure thing. So one of the things that was mentioned in the balance changes section was that sources of chaos conversion would be nerfed across the board. Now, we spoke to you recently about this, and you said this might not be finalized yet, but do you have any information about where you guys are headed with that?
So the guys are planning a balanced manifesto post, I think for Thursday, New Zealand time this week. And like all the other information, who knows, maybe it's Friday or Monday next week or earlier or something. But the current plan is Thursday this week, and they want to cover as much of the balance stuff as is final, while indicating what kind of stuff, is still intended to be touched, so that people can start planning their builds and so on. As a side note, I just wanted to throw out there, the tree changes so far this league are either nothing for the main tree, or the movement of one keystone. So don't expect, to wait until there's this massive unveil of the completely new passive tree. Most of the work here is focused on the Ascendancy classes with regard to tree changes, so this might be relevant. Anyway, the chaos damage conversion stuff, they have pretty much decided what they want to do with chaos damage uniques, like Voltaxic and Consuming Dark and so on. And I'm sure this will be mentioned in the manifesto post, but I have been given the all clear to talk about it here, if you're interested.
Nah.
Okay, what's the next section?
Just kidding. Yes, so please, I would love to hear.
They've playtested a lot of stuff, and they wanted to make sure that Chaos Conversion was still a thing, admittedly not as powerful as it is now. So the goal was not nerf it into the point where people don't use it, nor was the goal to restrict it so that the use of something like Voltaxic was only for archers. They didn't want to have it so that spellcasters would never use Voltaxic and archers still had it as the default choice. So after a lot of playtesting of different things and a lot of different values here, all Chaos Conversion uniques like Voltaxic Rift, Infernal Mantle, and Consuming Dark have been reduced to do 60% of their previous conversion. So that means the Consuming Darks are 30% each and Voltaxic is 60%. And this does not create any legacy items. We've managed to find a way to have it unilaterally affect all versions of these uniques, meaning that we don't have insanely overpowered characters running around as standard in these 300 Exalt items created because of it, which is either a good or a bad thing, depending on whether you've got a stack of Voltaxics in the stash.
All I hear...
Just to repeat, no legacy Voltaxic. I've had a bunch of people being like, I just bought 50 Voltaxic riffs.
Well, that's a gamble they took and lost.
That's what I've been telling them. I'm like, that's a gamble,
Chris,
bro.
have you ever seen that TV show where there's a guy with the stocks and he's like, sell, 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 sell now? That's everybody in Standard League right now.
What's the
Oh, yes.
Well, that's why Path of Exile's awesome. You can speculatively make a thing like that. If we'd have confirmed, yes, they're all legacy or something, then right now those guys are rich. In this case, they're not, but next time maybe. You know, speculation's good. As to actually playing with these, it does mean that potentially Voltaxic Spark is still a powerful build. I haven't personally played it to confirm, but, you know, the guys have tried very hard to make it so that 60% is still a relevant number. Now, of course, this introduces the word reflect, where potentially the other 40% of damage could be reflected, and that's something you should consider when planning your builds, but it kind of was meant to be from the beginning.
Jeez.
Okay, yeah. So the only like ones that are like truly reflect safe in terms of chaos are the actual pure intended chaos skills, and the ones that are converting, it's like, all right, I'm giving myself a big chunk of resilience against reflect.
Yeah, and there's probably a ton more small changes related to chaos that'll be in the Balance Manifesto, and I have a draft of that, but it's super dangerous to read out the unfinished paragraphs, so it might be safest to wait for the guys to finish writing that.
I think that's enough information for people to work with for now. All right, so we talked a little bit about this idea of rolling the core leagues into the game and how you're not really sure yet where the Prophecy will be. You have to kind of wait and see it out. So I guess that I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. You know, why haven't they been in the past, for example, rolled into the core game?
So looking historically at Path of Exile leagues, they started out as a way of testing out features, right? Like domination and anarchy and stuff like that was us saying, hey, we want to do shrines, we want to do rogue exiles, let's add it in a self-contained way, and if it's terrible, we won't do it. And so this continued where most of them made it to the core game. Obviously, Onslaught wasn't intended to, which is the one where the monsters were faster and so on, but it wasn't really intended to. That was just a cool distraction for hardcore players. So we continued rolling most leagues into the game. You know, Beyond got its place in maps, where it is a good place, I feel, just being in maps for the time being. And most things made their way in, except for something like Rampage, which we deemed as a failed experiment. You know, people didn't really enjoy Rampage, so we relegated it to a very narrow slice of just on a few uniques, which where it thematically fits, and there's a surprising amount of, you know, it gives a surprising amount of punch to those few uniques because people see it unlocks a whole kill streak system. So anyway, as time went on, we started to realize that adding things like Tempest and Warbands, for example, to the core game could be possible, but wouldn't necessarily work well. You know, we didn't have a pressing need for more map mods to add those, and we thought it would be better to save them for things like flashback events and so on, because there's a lot of value in being able to truck out a mechanic that we haven't used for a while. People understand how it works, they understand what items they get from it and how it works. You know, when you hear about Corrupting Tempest, you know how much of a payday that is. And so we bring them out occasionally on things like Dark Shrine, on things like flashback events. And in Prophecy has, I believe, both Warbands and Tempests represented pretty heavily. And so it's useful to have some past mechanics that aren't there in the core game. And then we get to Talisman, which is the first of the actually hard leagues that starts costing, you know, more than $500 million to make. And the thing about Talisman is that a lot of the members of the development team, including me, kind of view it as the best league ever. But a lot of players think, oh no, it was terrible. Talismans, you know, there was this promise of these insanely powerful amulets, and then we got unlucky and didn't get the best amulet, and they should have all been rare, and so on and so on. Maybe this is true. Maybe it was being sold on the promise that you could find this insane stuff, and the balance meant that the average guy didn't ever find an insane amulet. We still think that there's a ton of good stuff in Talisman, and we felt that rolling it into the core game in a really watered-down version would have kind of not done it justice. We'd rather bring it back in force rather than just a very, very rarely you'll find a Talisman and it takes forever to do the rig world thing, and we have to change how it works mathematically. And so it's sitting there, ready to come back with strength and potentially balance changes at some point. And then,
so how will that come back then at some point in the future?
We don't want to reveal or really even plan that fully yet. There are a ton of options, right? Like things can come back as Zana map mods, things can come back just in flashback events. Maybe we decide it's Talisman week and standard for a week. You know, I mean, we don't like the idea of doing double experience events because that's lame and makes people not want to play the rest of the time. But saying Talisman's now on for a week is not a bad way of doing that, because it somewhat hides the fact that there's free items for a week, you know, because there's lots of new fun to play in that league. So there are lots of ways we can bring this back. It could just be, one option was that Talisman affects Act 2, where you find them in the forests and stuff, and then that's just a unilateral thing. So we have a number of ways to do it, and we're biding our time. The game isn't low on content right now after the number of updates we've done, and there's some value in making sure we pick the right time to bring it back. And the same kind of thing applies to Parandus, except the coins are a little bit more ubiquitously affecting the game, I guess, where we can totally bring Kadiro and the coins back. Maybe that's a map mod where you pay something to get into a map that's full of coins and you're guaranteed to find a Kadiro. We're not sure, but it's nice to have the options available. And we view Prophecy the same way, where it probably stands a better chance of making it into the core game because it's playtesting very, very well so far, but we'll have to see how players feel. You know, it is one of those things where it may be that we want to phase out some mechanics that people are getting bored with from that we've used in the past. You know, maybe Tormented Spirits, for example. I mean, no one's complaining about them, but it could be that Tormented Spirits go away and instead you start finding Talisman monsters in the core game or silver coins. And so it's nice to have this rotation of things available in the future.
It seems like the ones that haven't made it in have been the ones that are more intrusive typically, like Warbands, for example, or Tempest. Whereas Prophecy is, like, the mobs that you find the silver coins off, right, are just regular monsters in the zone.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So you only interact with it if you want to. Yeah.
This is correct.
It wouldn't be intrusive at all. So it would roll into the game quite easily then.
And that's part of its design. It's just that we don't want to make that promise until people have actually played it.
Yeah.
Like, put it this way, if a few weeks from now people are hating on it and we've already promised it's going in the core game, that's a bit of a problem. Having said that, I'm optimistic. I doubt people will hate on it because it hits a midpoint between challenge and reward in a way that I'm pretty pleased with here. There's a number of layers of the reward, so if you just want to play the game and not care about prophecies, you trade silver coins to people who are desperate to get as many as they can. If you want to just trade itemized prophecies, where you use the silver coins and then pick the good prophecies, itemize those, and trade them to other players, quickly finishing the prophecies that you don't want to itemize to get them off your list. Then trading the rewarding ones to other players is a great way of getting guaranteed payment for them rather than taking the risk of what the reward is actually going to be. Or if you're the player that likes trading for prophecies, you can just cash in on doing all of the good ones all day, getting lots and lots of rewards. And I think like 30 of the prophecies on the list award specific uniques and so on, so you can quite easily complete those if you have a high-level character and know what to do.
Something I wanted to ask about previous leagues. This league around, we couldn't get anything from Talisman, from things like Jack in the Box or anything at all. All those Talisman uniques were inaccessible to us unless you played Standard League. So with Veranastra going away with Parandus, is there going to be a way in the future that we can get these uniques through divination cards or something? Because we could even get Talisman uniques from Kadiro because the league wasn't enabled. Is that something we might be able to work on in the future?
The divination cards that award from categories, like Jack in the Box, don't award old unique items. You have to specifically have a divination card that does award it. For example, if you made a divination card for Varanustra, then people can get it in the future forever unless there's some major reason for us to discuss not having that div card drop, but we haven't done that yet. So currently, the only method of a league-specific unique dropping in the game if it's not on Zana is for someone to do a divination card. And that's something we would probably say yes to unless there's a really good reason to say no for that particular item. Now, to answer your question, there may be ways in the future of getting these uniques. We understand many of them are build defining, and it kind of sucks to have to build a character without something that you're planning on. But then we don't mind the metagame changing between challenge leagues. I mean, there's a lot of push both internally and externally for us to turn off half the uniques in each league to shift the metagame. You know how we had Calm's Heart disabled in the first challenge leagues? It's that kind of thing. You do the experiment of what's it like without these uniques, and we have enough now that we could turn half of them off or a third of them off. We haven't in Prophecy, maybe we won't in the next challenge league, but there's a lot of push internally and externally to try to simplify the list and then raise the drop rates of the existing ones potentially.
All right. So let's keep things going here. Enough about core leagues and previous leagues. Let's talk about Ascendancy. So obviously you guys wanted to go full-fledged with this Ascendancy, and you're keeping the expansion here, and you added more to it with 2 extra points. What was the whole development history behind Ascendancy? Where did it start?
So back early-ish last year, we were in the final stages of the Awakening, and we knew that upon finishing the Awakening, that's the expansion that was called 200 that introduced Act 4 and so on, and Jewels. We realized that we'd have to come up with another expansion eventually, just like how now we're planning for expansions that start, that come out in 2017. Expansions take a long time to make. The Awakening had taken a couple of years of art for the Act, and so we always have to have stuff on the back burner going. So we figured, well, what are we doing after the Awakening? And several team members really liked the idea of doing a labyrinth. We'd experimented with this kind of thing in Descent Champions. It's a little bit because we grew up on those books by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone with Death Trap Dungeon and games and books like that that you can play through. So we really liked the idea of there being a crazy labyrinth full of traps and just slaughtering players in there. And so we decided, well, what if we pitch a expansion that takes place around a labyrinth with some rewards that you get at the end of it? And so we knew enough then, in say March or April of last year, to start work on creating the labyrinth stuff. And we realized, because of modularity, this wouldn't be too bad. This is trivial to release in late 2015 as an expansion. We'll be sweet. We'll just do the labyrinth and we'll give some extra cool stuff there. I mean, I've probably told this story before. I seem to recall telling the story in the past about how Ascendancy points started out as an awakening feature where we were intending to give extra passives in Act 4, which were class specific, and eventually it turned into full time we had to get this expansion out by November, but we trucked on ahead. By near November, it was getting pretty apparent that making the labyrinth was just it was one of those things where we realized there's so much cool stuff we can throw in there. Like, why not add dark shrines? Why not add secret rooms? Why not add passageways? Why not make Awakening? We released it and had some technical problems we needed to solve, and this dragged on a little bit and started to constrain the amount of time we had to get this expansion out by November, but we trucked on ahead. By near November, it was getting pretty apparent that making the labyrinth was just it was one of those things where we realized there's so much cool stuff we can throw in there. Like, why not add dark shrines? Why not add secret rooms? Why not add passageways? Why not make 3 stages of the Izaro fight? And we continued to add stuff to Ascendancy to make it into the expansion it deserved to be. We wanted it so that there were cool enchantments that you could get. We wanted it so that the Ascendancy trees were a lot better than our initial drafts and so on. And so we got to the point where we'd booked in a press tour to announce the Ascendancy expansion alongside the Talisman League in late 2015. And players weren't really crying out for a new expansion right now. They were certainly excited for a new Challenge League, but they were still enjoying all the Awakening stuff. So we realized, if we move this Ascendancy expansion to the next slot, we can make it a lot better. We can make these Ascendancy classes really good. We can have the Labyrinth contain a lot more content and have a lot more variety. And so we shifted that from the November slot to the March slot and announced Talisman. And this is why we announced Ascendancy about a week after announcing Talisman, because we had this tricky thing where we'd booked on a press tour. We're showing the press a half-finished version of Ascendancy, which was what was announced in November, and it may look indistinguishable from the current one, but that's because, polish and showing just the right bits off, I guess. And so no one at the time knew that the Ascendancy expansion was like a 60-40 vote, if you see what I mean, on whether or not Ascendancy gets pushed out in November, which would have been catastrophic, right? Releasing that 3 months early would have been the worst thing ever. So thankfully we chose the right thing by pushing it. But no one really understands publicly how close the Ascendancy release came to being last year, and a lot worse. So we're much more careful now with scoping expansions and predicting timelines and planning press activities around them to make sure that it's actually a feasible thing. And that's because we picked a release date for Ascendancy too early in development before we really had an idea of how large it could be. We could have released something, but doing it justice and releasing it properly took longer. Now, thankfully, that's okay, because all it did was swap around whether we get a Challenge League before Christmas and an expansion, or whether that's in March. And this worked really well. The Talisman release was one of our best ones in terms of player concurrency over Christmas, and then the Ascendancy release was even larger, and everything looked really good. And it's taught us as well that alternating just a Challenge League and then Challenge League plus expansion is a good formula. There's no need to do back-to-back expansions if it's going to mean we miss deadlines because Right.
I noticed you guys have done something a little different with Ascendancy as well. Like, Prophecy is essentially an expansion to Ascendancy because we're getting this extra lab. Was that intended from the outset, that there would be, the Ascendancy would grow with Prophecy, directly, in terms of we're actually getting another labyrinth?
So we initially intended there to be the map labyrinth, which is now called the Endgame Labyrinth, in the Ascendancy release. We just said, we made 4 from the start. The problem is that by the 4th one, it gets really boring to play through, which is now called the Endgame Labyrinth in the Ascendancy release. We just said, we made 4 from the start. The problem is that by the 4th one, it gets really boring to play through 3 labyrinths and then a 4th without any differences. So we knew we wanted to make the Endgame Labyrinth different, to add at least one new trap type that interacts with the others, to do an overhaul of making sure that it's challenging enough, because by the time you play through the first 3, it's not going to be that hard to play through the 4th, but it has to be hard because it's the endgame. And so we wanted to make sure we took some time to actually grow up the labyrinth a bit and fix problems based on feedback and so on. So we did design all of the Ascendancy trees around 8 points. In fact, we had some near misses where we were about to release the Ascendancy trees on the passive tree planner and stuff, and it still allowed you to allocate 8 points rather than 6. And there were cases where we almost leaked to the community the 8-point thing. The Scion, for example, Ascendancy class was completely designed around 8 points from the start, because the intention is you get 2 of the passives, 2 of the special passives, and also a start point. And so we had to make a decision when we were releasing it to do the Endgame Labyrinth well and take longer to do it. And so we've had the level design guys working on that for the last 3 months. It feels very different because of the sentinel traps which we've added. And I understand a lot of the community don't like the labyrinth. This is a thing that, I hear. While the people are vocal who don't like it, it is only a small portion of the players. Many are happy to go through it as an interesting thing in the game. Many people really hate it. So this to me is not the end of the world. It's okay to have divisive content in the game, right? We don't want to water stuff down until everyone's, I guess, okay with it. It's fine for there to be stuff that people...
Yeah.
This is... The games that I've enjoyed most in the past are the bit where there's things where I fear or don't want to do, but there's a reason to do them. And that may take people outside of their comfort zone, and I understand that causes them to petition for those things to be removed. And I get a lot of emails asking for a new method to get Ascendancy points that bypasses the labyrinth. Maybe that's something we'll do in the future, right? We're not close to the idea, but it's not something that's coming out in this expansion.
I think divisive is better than okay, I guess.
I like making content that people have opinions about, right? And a lot of people have written in to say just how much they love the gameplay in the labyrinth and how it's great to see an action RPG with some areas where you have to be careful. And that's...
Hey, Chris, sorry.
Sorry, go.
I'll let you finish. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
I was just going to say, I understand it doesn't go with the clear speed meta that we have at the moment, right? This is a slower paced content, maybe for a slower paced Path of Exile, but it is still content that we like being in the game. And we're pretty proud of the labyrinth and the role that it has.
My question to you, sorry to interrupt earlier, with 8 points in the game, and I know there's been talks for the past 2 years of removing cruel difficulty. Obviously, when you move cruel difficulty, remove a labyrinth along with it. Is this going to cause any problems in the future? Perhaps Act 5, 6, wherever the game decides to go, with how the points are going to be strewn about.
If we were to remove cruel difficulty in the future, and at the moment we have no definitive plan to do that, but if we were to do so, then this would involve a massive overhaul of changing where people get points from. I mean, it would involve removing bandit quests. There are a lot of reasons why it would be a difficult change. Now, our view on this, basically, is we came very close to removing cruel difficulty when the Awakening came out, but at the end of the day, we feel that 3 is a lot better than 2. Now, this is one of those things where the community are going to think we're crazy for saying this, but ask a game designer, the rule of 3 is a very strong thing, right? Doing something and then doing it again is a lot worse than doing it a total of 3 times with a different experience in each. And so our goal here is to make Cruel and Merciless more interesting. Now, we've done part of that in the Prophecy release because we have the new monster types that we can talk about at some stage, which use new skills and make those difficulties a bit more interesting. Long term, I think it's more likely that we drop down to 1 difficulty than to 2. So a longer term plan is a single playthrough of a very, very large Path of Exile before the end game. Now that requires there being a lot more content in the game, and multiple difficulty levels are a mainstay of action RPGs. The whole Diablo 1, Diablo 2 thing where, even games like Titan Quest had this, where you can play through 3 different difficulty levels, is something that we don't want to change too much for the sake of it. And I understand it's a bit of a long playthrough getting through the first 3 difficulty levels before you get to maps, but players are only getting better at this. Every league they do it more quickly, and hopefully every league they have more fun as we add more stuff to those.
So I'd like to, you mentioned that the reason for the delay on the 4th lab was changing and making it significantly different. Could you walk us through that a bit? Like, what's different about the lab? How do the trials work in maps especially?
Okay, cool. This is ripe for misinformation, I'm sure, because we've only given a tiny little overview. Now, this is something we've got a news post planned for, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday to clarify, but there's no harm in clarifying early. Okay, so here's how it currently stands, as best I understand. You can find these trials in maps, and they occur randomly, and not particularly often. And there are 6 new trials. They only go up to yellow maps, as far as I am aware, so you do not need to be in red maps in order to get all of Sentinel traps, which are internally called pop-up traps. The Sentinel traps can be suppressed by doing damage to them. It makes them pop down, and then after a while they come back up again and apply their effect, which can range from area denial to affecting the monsters or you. And there's a lot of different things they do. I mean, I've seen a list of more than 10 distinct things that they do. And this is interesting because it makes trap combinations you're used to suddenly a lot harder, where you press by doing damage to them, it makes them pop down, and then after a while they come back up again and apply their effect, which can range from area denial to affecting the monsters or you. And there's a lot of different things they do. I mean, I've seen a list of more than 10 distinct things that they do. And this is interesting because it makes trap combinations you're used to suddenly a lot harder, where you have to do suppressing fire on certain objects every now and then. So anyway, you have to complete all 6 trials like normal before you can access the Endgame Labyrinth, and these will be shared across the league, of course. So if you like the other trials are now, if you complete it with one character, you don't need to complete it with another. Now, the Endgame Labyrinth itself is not something you can run back-to-back continuously like the regular labyrinths. every time you complete a trial, you get a map-like item that lets you enter the Endgame Labyrinth. So if you're a new character, you get to maps, and you complete your first trial, you get an item. You can't use it yet because you haven't done all 6. And then you complete your second trial, you get another item, and this continues. At this stage, you could easily trade these away to people who have access if you want to, and they'll be worth something. Or you can save them up until the point when you finish your 6 trials, which may be frustrating because you get repeats and that kind of thing. But when you've eventually done this behavior and got all 6 trials complete, you could then use your stash of Endgame Labyrinth maps to play the Endgame Labyrinth. And if you need more, well, they'll be coming from players who are doing maps. And this ties more non-map progression with map gameplay, which is something people have asked for, where they feel that earning access to Uber at Zeri is something that they have to do through not playing in maps because it's hard to get fragments there. This is a way that you can make progress at the non-map endgame by playing in maps.
So I'm getting the sense that this lab is really definitely a long-term project, like something that you work on for quite a bit, and you don't really get those extra 2 points until you're well into your 80s.
Right, this is something where initially the design here was that it was far harder than this. It was one of the things where, we were intending it to be where we don't even mention there is an in-game labyrinth, and it's just that a player happens to find a trial, and all of Reddit goes, what the hell is that? There's a trial in the map? And then another player finds a trial, and eventually they piece together over 3 months the ability for one guy to get slaughtered on the in-game labyrinth. That was the extent we wanted it to be at the beginning. We've realized now it's probably a bit extreme, but it's still not a trivial grind, right? This isn't something where you start playing in a league, you're in maps within a day, and you've got the endgame labyrinth 3 hours later. It certainly requires, it's a long-term character development thing within the league. Now, realistically, it's probably days for the community because they're fast, much faster than we think. But it's still something that you shouldn't expect, entitlement to as soon as you get into maps. It's going to take some hunting to find all the trials. And if you want to run the endgame labyrinth in order to farm 4th tier enchantments, that's going to require a bit of investment getting the items for it, because you need both, of course, a powerful character and also to have a constant supply of these endgame labyrinth maps that have to come from other mappers.
So something I wanted to talk about. There's 2 things with Labyrinth going on. So last time you were on the show, we talked about energy shield builds and how they function in maps, specifically, or how they function in Labyrinth, specifically Eldritch Battery with Mind Over Matter and hybrid builds getting really, really screwed, kind of sort of with CI. Do you know if your team has been working on that? Or is it intended? Is it being fixed?
Yeah, there's a fix in 2.3.0. So basically now when it's counting how much damage traps do to you, it only counts Energy Shield as being worth 60% of its value as life. So the traps will immediately do 40% less if you were entirely Energy Shield. And they're fiddling with this value still. 60% is the current one they're on, but Carl notes that he's unsure if that's final because there's still iteration being done, especially now that most of the rest of the balance is in place. They can do some real playtesting of it. But that basically means that Energy Shield is not worth as many life points as it otherwise would be, and the traps will do less damage to you than they previously did.
And as for hybrid will be still taking a lot more damage, because if you're taking 100% as life and then 60% as ES, you're still taking 1.6 times maybe more damage than those of just life.
That's correct. You do take more damage because you have Energy Shield, but it's not as much as it was previously. And this is something they are testing when they're playing through. Hybrid, Energy Shield, and either Armor or Evasion are popular builds in the office, so it's something they're putting a lot of playtesting on.
Okay, sounds good. What else do we have with Labyrinth? All right, so helmet enchants. You're introducing new or upgraded helmet enchants, obviously with the new tier of Labyrinth. There's over 300 helmet enchants, and there's new skills being added, which means there'll be even more helmet enchants. Is this is there a way that we might be able to get our helmet enchant easier if we have that skill gem equipped? Is there a math to this at all?
So a couple of things to note. The first one is, it turns out, and I only found this out when I was putting the announcement page together, but there's not just helmet enchants, there's also the boot and glove enchants where there's a new tier of available. So it's a 4th tier everything, which is pretty cool. I talked to a lot of journalists last week where I just mentioned the helmet enchants being 4th tier, but they've added, commandment on kill and so on. So in terms of your actual question, there isn't obliquely a new way to have like a faster progress through this grind. It's the same kind of ratio as it was in the past, because now you're only seeing the 4th tier ones. And sure, adding more skills does dilute it slightly, but there are ways outside of the labyrinth to interact with this now. And an example is, there is a prophecy, I probably shouldn't spoil all the cool prophecies, but there's a prophecy that says that when you get to use the divine font, you get to use it twice. So if you have that prophecy, then you do a labyrinth run, you get 2 enchants. Now, I don't know what this is going to be worth to players. It plays into the complicated economic system of some people are farming enchants and some people are farming prophecies, and so there'll be a bit of fighting over this particular one in terms of how much it's worth. But if you are farming enchants, especially in the Endgame Labyrinth, you really want to have that prophecy on you every single time, and that means that that prophecy might be worth a portion of what one of these tier 4 enchants is worth. And so if you're a low-level player and you get it, you have a tough choice between selling that for 30 chaos or whatever it works out to, I don't know, versus doing it yourself to get 2 shots at the enchant.
That is the fix we needed. All right. Because RNG wanted 300. And then you see that perfect item, and it's like, well, this is 10x. Normally it's a 1C item. All right. you know?
No,
It's a really interesting... I was just say it's really interesting interaction between the two leagues kind of coming together, those two different, like, crossing over, as you said, like the economic interaction there between players across the
this
the
one,
mechanics.
obviously, this is not going to be the most common prophecy, right? Like, this isn't something you're getting every day, because that would be a bit silly. Then you have, 100,000 or so of these being itemized and put on trade, and then it's worth nothing, and then you know what I mean? So it is a relatively rare, rewardy one. Like, there's no challenge there. You just get another enchant, right? You get the results of doing 2 labyrinths for 1, so it's just pure gift. But we've been careful, by the way, with Prophecies on the Labyrinth, that Prophecies don't interact with the Labyrinth difficulty. There's no advantage to having a prophecy on you when you're competing for time for the jewels. Like, we don't want that to be the fastest Labyrinth run times. We don't want to be a competition of who has the most wealth in the current Challenge League. So the prophecies do interact, however, with the results of the Labyrinth. So they can give you 2 enchantments, or maybe you can get another treasure key, or that kind of thing.
Now, before we leave Labyrinth and Ascendancy, we missed the very important from the last page, Ziggy. You ready for this? What classes got the biggest buffs, and which classes got a few drawbacks, Chris? This is like too important to skip. This is monumental, man. We saw the Slayer got a change, so you want to start off with that one, Chris?
So the Slayer is a class people consider very weak, but it's had quite a lot of changes. Like, I think you've seen the layout has changed on it, and I spoke to the design team about this, and their preference is to talk in the balance post, so I'm just going to talk relatively generally here. But as well as looking at classes, they were also looking at nodes that people actually picked less than others. So even on a popular tree, like, say, the Champion, there were nodes there that were barely picked. Especially, by hardcore players who they all went pretty, strongly in Fortify. So the goal was, as well as making the classes more balanced, was to make it so the nodes within the classes are more balanced. And they wanted to do this in a way where they didn't take the fun of each class and just ruin it, right? They didn't say, oh, that permanent Fortify, we're getting rid of that. They just wanted to make sure that the Champion was balanced in other ways. Now, I haven't personally seen the balance changes made to the Champion, kind of purposely before I say this, but the way I would approach that is keeping the permanent Fortify, just reducing some of the stacking bonuses so that you don't have permanent insane Fortify, you just have permanent good Fortify. Now, there is a list of changes that they've made, but it looks like it's better for them to communicate them through the balance post, because that actually gives them time to finish the testing first. And they've made a note here where they've said, certain players should expect changes with the Champion, which is the most taken class in hardcore, and of course the Slayer. Most of the classes had some changes. So that's basically what they wanted me to say here. It's not particularly long.
Okay.
And I do have...
So we'll get a balance post update soon about that then.
Yeah,
there's gonna be some pitchforks in the chat, Chris. I'm just gonna let you know.
I'm sorry for not being able to provide this. Whatever I communicate here is going to be taken as gospel and isn't going to be enough, right? Like, if I list out a couple of examples, people are going to assume those are the only ones that are good now. They want to make everything really good. And so they're going to communicate how it all works, what's different, much, much better than I can do here. It just means waiting a few days, guys.
Okay.
So development
Everybody,
manifesto?
put the pitchforks down.
This plays into the ongoing topic of power creep that I'm sure we'll mention in this podcast, where the intention here is not to fight power creep by just ruining all the Ascendancy classes and making it so that 8 points are the same as 4 previously or something, right? Most of the buffs here are buffs. There are obviously probably some changes to the most powerful things to reduce them a bit, but the average power of Ascendancy classes is only rising as a result of these changes here.
Yep. Okay.
So
one last thing about the Labyrinth before we move on to that topic. Is there anything new about the actual Izaro fight itself? Because there's the new trap actually traveling through the Labyrinth. How does the Izaro fight pan out? Is it like incredibly difficult? Is there added mechanics there?
There's some interesting stuff going on with ideas people have been playing with. I haven't actually played through the Endgame Labyrinth myself yet. I've been very busy working on Prophecy and the upcoming China launch, but we have some very cool stuff going on with traps in Izaro's room, and also some interesting things. I don't know if the guys will get them in on time, but there are some cool ideas for surprises we can throw into the Izaro fight very occasionally for players. We like the Reddit moment thing where something happens 1 in 30 times and it's hard to get to start with. So someone posts an awesome VOD on Reddit, and it surprises everyone.
All right, so there'll be some fun little surprises in there at least.
Yep. I mean, obviously, this depends what we have time for, because fun surprises in the Izaro fight are less important than Prophecy working correctly. So, there may be one of those things we patch in the weeks after the patch if they're not fully finished, by next weekend.
So something I think that was pretty underrated and the biggest hype of all, in my opinion, is the performance improvements. Would you like to explain how the whole game is being changed, and what kind of performance improvements were you exactly talking about?
So there are 2 areas there. The first one is we have a new sound system. The old one had some problems. There was a growing number of players who turned sound off completely. And so that wasn't really very good. I mean, sound makes the game what it is. So we wanted to replace that with a good system. So we found a world-class sound system that every other game uses. We got it in there, and the sound guys are so happy, just smiles every day. They won't need pay raises for a while. I'm kidding, but the sound system guys are really, really pleased with the new tech we've got, and that's important because it gives them a lot more tools to make the game sound better. So the first thing to note is that over time, and already, the sound of the game is going to be improved. And as they get time to actually go and redo things that they dislike to make sure it's good, they have a lot more tools at their disposal. The second thing to note is that the new sound system supports compressed sounds. So we can load sounds into memory without taking very much memory, and this has large implications for the other memory stuff I'm talking about. I mean, that alone saves a ton of space. It's just a really big deal, because at the end of the day, Path of Exile was using a lot more memory than it should have done. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this. It gets technical, but we've overhauled how all of that works. So now it will load in the background while you're playing. And this means that when you run the game, it just pops onto the main menu immediately. There's no loading, right? It's less than a second on an SSD. It's a couple of seconds on a regular hard drive. And this hasn't improved the inter-level loading screens as much as the initial one. I mean, there are improvements there. I roughly measured 20% off when I was measuring it with a stopwatch on my laptop. But they're continuing to improve the memory stuff, so we will see some more benefits between load screens in the game. Now, the benefit, of course, is the largest here when you're playing on a regular platter-based hard drive, where previously you'd have to wait several minutes to get the game up, potentially, and load screens between different areas were really long. Now, because it's loading in the background, you can keep playing while it's happening. And there's a lot of work going into the fact that because not everything is loaded, we still want the game to not be a stuttery experience. And so there's a lot of cool behind-the-scenes stuff happening to make sure that the assets are loaded when they're needed. This also means that the game won't crash due to being out of memory. Now, for many years now, 32-bit users have not been able to run Path of Exile, basically. They can get in and they can play, but it's going to crash, every 10 areas or something. And this wasn't really acceptable. So now the game works perfectly from that point of view. It's a much better, citizen of your computer. You can run it and not have half of your RAM chewed up by the game, So there's a lot of benefits there. And of course, this means that because things are faster to load, any stuttering you were getting in the past due to runtime loading of assets, like you're in combat and some weird sound is used that we forgot to preload, now that's going to be a ton faster and done in the background. And so a lot of the frame rate problems that were due to the fact that we were loading synchronously while we were playing are now resolved. Of course, general frame rate isn't vastly increased compared to before. There are some improvements due to this, and overall combat frame rate is something that we plan to continue having the performance guys work on in the future.
I promised everybody on Twitch and YouTube I'd bring up this one word today with you, Chris. So in Parandus League, we had gold monsters, and these gold monsters lagged us. And we've seen in this YouTube video trailer, there's these purple monsters. Will these purple monsters lag us at all?
So it's worth noting, in Prophecy, there isn't really a concept of purple monster packs. It's just that when the guys were making the trailer, they wanted to show these monsters are different than normal. Now, sometimes that's easy because you can show Chevron Spirit and Brutus, or you can show there being Brutus and Cole in the same fight. But having purple monsters is a good way of bringing across the purple theme that we had with Prophecy. So where there were purple monsters available, they were covered. This isn't really a standard thing throughout the game. Yeah, purple's used a lot in Prophecy, but it's not like there are Prophecy packs and they all have purple on them. Now, the purple in this case is more of a color shift like rare monsters get, where they get a tint around them, rather than a laggy effect. So I wouldn't worry too much about this new league introducing performance problems, because they're very conscious of the fact that there were some performance issues with the effects on Parandus.
It's good to know. So it's not just going to be another gimmick, gold monsters, not just purple monsters.
Yeah.
Occasionally you'll find some, but mostly it's about the prophecy being purple, not the purple monster.
Well, Yeah, you get, put it this way, if the prophecy adds packs of monsters to the area, they sometimes are purple monsters. Oftentimes they're other things as well. You know, I mean, the Feral Lord example we've been trekking around has like lightning on those corrupted monsters rather than purple. So it's just that there are some purple monsters and they were shown heavily in the trailer.
Can you confirm gold monsters are gone?
They will be because there's no more Piranhas, yeah.
All right, success.
we did it, Reddit.
We did it.
We did it, Reddit.
take the next one, Ziggy.
All right, that's a good time to move on to. We mentioned a couple times already the topic of power creep versus difficulty. The post mostly focused on the prizes we're getting, like the extra 2 points, the powerful new unique upgrades and so on. But it seems like there's actually some, more difficult content coming as well, not only in the lab, but also these new monsters. I guess before we get on to the nitty gritty, what's your vision for difficulty in PoE? What's it been, for like, since the origin? You talked to us about this the other day, and I found your vision to be really interesting. Do you mind sharing it for everyone?
So I'm going to describe my vision and hopefully not imply that means I'm 100% happy with where things are at now, right? Like treat where Path of Exile is at now as a different thing from what the vision is. But the vision is that a Path of Exile player can come home from work after a long day and play Path of Exile knowing that he's going to destroy some monsters, right? Not getting in a situation where it takes 6 hits to kill a white monster because it's so tanky and you have to like chip away at monsters and it's insanely difficult. I want a situation where your character is powerful, it destroys, regular groups of monsters just fine, and it feels rewarding to kill them all and get some items. And it's kind of a mindless behavior. You can chill out and watch TV while you're playing PoE, and then suddenly the spikes of difficulty. You run into the Storm Herald monster. There's a few aura combinations you have to worry about, maybe reflect. And so there's things that keep you alert. But the overall experience is not beating down on monsters one at a time for a long period of time to gradually finish a map in 45 minutes. And so we've had times in the past where the game has been too difficult in various different ways, and we've kind of tried to reinforce the vision of this being something that players with a competent build and good items can just kind of plow their way through. Now, this is an aspirational thing that we want to work towards, and I feel at the moment it's probably too easy for a number of characters, but we have to be careful. We can't just numerically make it harder. We can't just say, oh, well, we'll just make monster damage in life a ton harder, have fun with that, because there are the silent majority, the invisible players, who are playing much less powerful characters with worse items and potentially enjoying themselves doing so because it's not quite so easy for them. And so it may be that we've achieved our goal for the people who are not posting on Reddit, those other guys, and retention numbers are really good at the moment, right? Those people are not dropping off. And I understand a top player will play the game and say, that is easier than before, I want more challenge. And so we do want to fix it for them and provide the challenge. And to some extent, that's kind of the focus of future updates to the game, is making sure that there is a lot of cool challenge and reward for top-end players. Balanced work will be done to address this power creep, and there's a number of ways we can do it, but I suspect you're probably going to want to ask about those.
Well, yeah, so instead of just doing a blanket monster buff like in 2.0, what is your plan? Because, I remember yesterday you were mentioning something about goats.
Right. So we've been reviewing balance stuff in maps. Now, this is something the team have kind of been looking at that I'm sure some members of the team aren't even aware of, because we haven't had a meeting about it since, people found this out. But on Friday, I was shown some very interesting data. So imagine you're playing in a map and it's challenging. You're taking a lot of damage from the monsters that are dangerous and not as much damage from some of the other monsters. So we said, well, why is this? And we had a look into it. And so due to various, internal processes and so on, there are some monsters where we haven't updated their damage for a while. And an interesting example is a goat shaman, where they showed that if you're in a really high level map and some monster can hit you for 1k plus damage, a goat shaman's fireball is doing like 30. And there are just a lot of monsters out there where they just aren't doing damage correctly. They're left over from the Maelstrom of Chaos, like 5 years ago or something. And because of this, there are scary moments in maps, but they only apply to the monsters that are doing their damage correctly. And so we're going to make sure that rather than just saying, okay, all monsters do 20% more damage, we'll take the monsters that really were just tickling you and make sure that they're kind of punchy like the other monsters. And this will probably raise the power level of the maps, but in a much more challenging way for players than just saying, remember those spikes that were killing you? Well, they're definitely going to kill you this time, because we'll leave those spikes alone. We'll let you use your 2 Ascendancy points to mitigate the damage from that kind of stuff. And so there may be changes to monster damage in life in maps due to the power creep, right? We're still fiddling, but we will make sure that all the monsters provide an equal challenge. And this also plays into the new monsters that we're adding in order to be difficult, which I'm happy to talk about as well.
So yeah, that topic is of particular interest to me, this idea that you're incorporating new monster skills into the game, or these new monsters alongside of packs. And I spent like a lot of yesterday's stream talking with my stream about what are cool things we could add to a zombie pack or an Arctic Leaper pack. What cool things could these guys get to synergize and make them more difficult? So how is this new system going to work for new highly skilled monsters? How's it going to add more difficulty to the game? And could you share some examples?
So these guys are no different than the existing Goatman shamans in the game that used skills. It's just that there are a ton more of those kind of monsters. And one of the questions that's been asked is, what are these called? Are they champions? Are they bosses? And at the end of the day, they're just monsters, right? They are no different than a regular guy. Just like how a Sea Witch has a cool wave attack, these guys are no different. They're just monsters that use skills, except they're kind of like the shamans, where they don't occur as often as the regular goatmen, and they're kind of leading the packs. And this actually, due to the way the generation works, makes them marginally more likely to be promoted to magic. Well, not promoted to magic, but promoted to rare. So the rare generation thing will make sure to pick the most prominent member of a pack to become the boss. And these
like
guys
with
are the most
necromancers, for example.
Right. So because of this, you will encounter them marginally more often as rares, though they can easily be whites. And their basic role is to provide skills that back up the other monsters that are in interesting ways. An example is there's some Magma Orb, Goatman Fire Raisers in the Climb. There's Spectral Throw, Spectral Swashbucklers in the Ship Graveyard. You've got Crichton's Sentry in the Broken Bridge who uses Blast Rain. There's Cannibal Fire Eaters on the coast that breathe fire. You've got some Enraging Oaks Brutes in the Wetlands. You know, there's a bunch of monsters like that, which mean that in the Cruel and Merciless playthroughs, and especially in maps, the game is harder in a more interesting way. Now, these guys aren't in normal on purpose. In normal, that's just teaching people how to play the game. But as soon as you get to Cruel, suddenly we've kind of, filled in the speed bump, the hole in the road, as it were, that you get where you're too powerful for the beginning of Cruel, because now there's some interesting new skills being used on you, and it does feel like quite a difference. And they have another 10 or so of these that they're working on, which will be added in future patches. This set here is a pretty good start. And the thing that surprised people is how effective these monsters are in maps. Because once they've got all the map balance, of the very high life and damage values that map monsters get, it's actually pretty scary to run into these monsters that use more powerful skills than regular monsters do.
And just to confirm, the iteration of these are coming in 2.3, these new monsters.
2.3 has the ones that I listed there and potentially a few others, but there are a set coming in the future, and we'll continue to add them because this is the thing in the game now rather than here is a particular wave of new bosses.
I actually kind of like this because instead of just leagues being a test for the core of the game is being updated on its own free will rather than a league being a test for that. This is exactly what the game needed because it was getting too easy. The power creep was getting too real. Instead of just testing Parandus and then adding it to the core, you're just going back to its roots and fixing what was broken, such as 30 damage fireball.
Right. The only thing here that's Prophecy specific is the Prophecy system. All the stuff like the Endgame Labyrinth and all of the other balance changes and these monsters and so on are being thrown in the core game. And I've actually I got 2 emails overnight, which is interesting, being about the same topic, where both players said, hey, I'm a standard player, and I'm upset that you keep putting this cool stuff in challenge leagues and then completely taking it away from the game. I get nothing new for playing in standard. And that's an upsetting thing to hear, and it may be partly true. And this is why every second release that we do is an expansion, and as you know, expansion content affects the full game. So whenever cool stuff is coming in 2.4, immediately applicable to standard on day one. Of course, 2.4 will have a challenge league with it, and standard players won't get to play that challenge league, so they should consider it if they want to. But it is an interesting topic, the concept of making sure that everything that improves the game is coming to standard.
So I think we only really have one topic left to discuss. We're kind of running out of time here. So let's go over some stuff in the near future. Past Prophecy. So basically, how is the game expanding over time? What are your plans after Prophecy? Maybe possible dates and how you would go about the community hyping these and sharing with us these dates.
We're trying as hard as possible to hit a 13-week cycle at the moment. So that means 12 weeks of Challenge League, and then a week between leagues, and then a launch. Now, 13 weeks is an interesting number because it divides equally into 52 4 times. So that means if we pick 4 points of the year to have challenge leagues where every second one also has an expansion and players can predict the version number will increase 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, and so on, this pattern continues until we decide to release 3.00. Now, the 3.0 release is a bigger deal, like how The Awakening was. And at that stage, maybe there's a beta for it or something because it's a much larger change. And that probably disrupts the schedule of this kind of stuff because it doesn't, if you're throwing betas and stuff in there or whatever, then it involves breaking up the 4 releases per year cycle. But for the foreseeable future, the intention is that we're on a 13-week cycle. And this means that players can predict that 2.4.0 is probably coming out on September 3rd, and 2.5.0 is probably coming out in early December, just like Talisman did. So we're not wanting to commit to, here is an exact release date for this product, because we're scared of scaring people away from the new leagues. Like, it's one of those things where we don't want to announce 4 weeks into Prophecy, oh, here's the next expansion, because people will say, great, I'm going to go away and then play that when it's out. But we do want to foreshadow the fact that there is cool Path of Exile stuff coming every 3 months. And we are pretty confident in our ability to hit these timelines. And so we're going to give indicative dates of early September and early December as the next 2 releases.
So you can roughly plan your time off from work during the year as well.
Yes, that also helps. People have asked for more notice. And I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about how the version numbers for PoE work and what is an expansion to what. Because you'll notice that logo-wise, there are 3 things going on in the Path of Exile logo for the Prophecy stuff. Like, for a start, it's using the Awakening frame. Now, by that I mean there's been 2 different versions of the Path of Exile logo. There's the old yellow one with the gold in the background, and then there's the new one with the stone around the outside and the lava, which is the Kurui logo as we think of it. And the old one was used for Path of Exile 1.0 and 1.1 and 1.2, you know, Sacrifice of the Vile and Forsaken Masters and so on. And we just put Sacrifice of the Vile or Forsaken Masters under the yellow frame. Then when we went to 2.0, we switched over to using the new logo, which has the fire and the stone, because it's Awakening themed. And for Ascendancy, I put Ascendancy underneath that one. So that means the next expansion, being 2.4, gets the name of the expansion underneath that logo. But then when 3.0 comes out in the future, we switch again to another different logo. And I've seen a prototype of this. It's looking pretty awesome. So all the 3.x series of expansions have their name underneath the new 3rd version of the logo. And it's also these major releases where we change the first version number and change the logo. We also changed the UI in the game potentially. Like, we switched away from the Chained Ladies from 1.0 to the current Awakening themed stuff in 2.0. And potentially, if we switch over to, when we release the 3.0 update at whatever point it is, we'll switch across to a new UI layout there as well. And this has other subtle effects that people may not have noticed. So this is an interesting thing, because we changed it, and I've never received a mail or seen a comment about it. In 1.0, when you hover over an item, it looks like, well, you can see what it looks like on screenshots on Google. But in 2.0, we changed how item hovers look by changing the ornamentation around the sides. Like in a rare item where it's yellow at the top, there's a different Karui-themed ornamentation on the left and the right than there were on 1.0 items. So this is something we changed, thinking it's cool to give the item hovers a fresh look, and no one noticed as far as
no one noticed.
So that's interesting. I mean, it's fine for no one to notice. It still serves its purpose of making the game feel different, and it's important that super major expansions do feel very different from previous ones.
I feel sorry for the artist that no one pointed it out.
I don't
Poor
need
Eric.
to now.
Feels bad, Eric.
Just to reiterate for you guys, when you mouse over rare, like the title the brackets around the title of it look different with the new expansion.
Yeah, and all the other items, like uniques from 1.0 and 2.0 do look different from each other. And we'll continue to change that in the future alongside other things. But we thought it was important to explain how these various version numbers turn into each other. Like, what makes a 2.4 not a 3.0, you know? And the answer is it's an expansion like Ascendancy or Sacrifice of the Vile or Forsaken Masters, not one like The Awakening, which introduced Act 4.
That's great. So, something non-expansion, non-content patch related, racing. We didn't have one last week. Do you have any spoilers maybe about racing this potentially?
So we're interested in getting an idea about to what extent people want a race season, even if not very much changes. Because we're in a situation where we've pledged, hey, here are the changes we'd like to make to racing. And then we just haven't made those changes yet. And this is an awkward situation, because when we go to run a race season, we have the choice of making it very clear we haven't made those changes, as well as spending a bunch of time that we don't have creating the race season. Or saying, well, look, the league's ending soon, have a flashback event, and then look, exciting stuff coming soon. And I understand people are holding up for races, and we're not saying there aren't any more races. We're just desperately trying to find time to improve the system. And if people are okay with us running a system without very many changes, we can run one towards the end of Prophecy. And I'd like to, because racing is very cool. It's just that my dream to get those changes in soon is held back by very real pragmatic things that we have to work on, right? Like, performance stuff must always come before racing. Performance stuff affects 100% of the people in the game. Racing affects a subset of the community. In addition, hitting our deadlines of releasing new content is really important, because the ability for us to pay our staff revolves around us having new releases, because new releases make money for the company. There's lots of players and so on. And so we absolutely have to make sure we hit our core schedule. And then we have other obligations, right? We're working for a really big launch in China. This is going to be a huge event for the company and for Path of Exile worldwide. That's taking resources. And I'm leading that charge myself and making sure it doesn't impact on our normal game development. But all of this stuff and these distractions do mean that we haven't yet got to the race changes that we promised in the past. And so it's one of the things where if the community are happy to have race seasons that are like the previous ones, we can run these.
So is it kind of like the situation where if you guys were able to miss the next race season, you'd be able to bring racing back the season after that with a bunch of significant changes and improvements? Is that kind of the situation that the company's in at the moment?
In theory, I mean, missing a season does save us a bunch of time. Debatably, it doesn't necessarily save us the time from the people who would be making the race season improvements, who are busy on very, very other important stuff. Like having Prophecy work correctly and fixing the last couple of bugs in it, given we're a couple of weeks out, means we're not touching racing in the next 2 weeks. And then we have all of the early post-Prophecy launch stuff to fix. And, you know, it's one of those things where it's hard to find the exact moment to throw. The race stuff affects a lot of people. It affects back-end server programming. There's some Jonathan time in there. It affects UI guys. It affects artists, right? Like, we need compelling rewards. Making a whole bunch of alternate art unique items slows down the art team that are hard at work on stuff right now. And so we have to make sure to find the right time to do all of those things, and it can only be launched when they're all ready. Making sure that none of them delay stuff. Like, let's say the next Challenge League is being delayed by the fact we're doing race art. That would be a big problem, especially if we're indicating dates out in advance. So we need a better system for handling this. It's mostly an internal problem, but I'm just trying to articulate the reasons why we had to miss this season, right? Call it a failure of management on my part, but we will make sure to try to get this all to come together for the future, because racing is a part of the game that we love.
Yeah. Awesome. Do you guys have an approximate idea of what's the engagement level in racing in its current iteration or in the last season?
Well, we can see the numbers in the race threads and so on of how many people enter, and the engagement is dropping as we continue to not add new things, right? Like the last season was similar to the one before. It was great. I mean, it's worth running. It's just not engaging a lot of the community. And maybe with better, like, you know, commentator tools and stuff, we can make it more of a spectator sport, and that would be pretty neat, adding that kind of stuff. But again, that's more Jonathan time to get that in. So it's all a matter of what do we spend this valuable time on. And I don't mean just Jonathan. The rest of the team are very busy with a lot of stuff as well.
You know, back on episode 20, you talked about Jonathan time being important time, and then on Friday you said to us, Jonathan has people underneath him, so now there's Jonathan people time, and I never thought I'd be hearing that.
Yeah, this year we've scaled up our senior programmers quite a lot, so there are people, like, there's dedicated people working on server backend programming and graphics optimization stuff, and, you know, people doing the sound system, and people working dedicatedly on performance who directly report to Jonathan. And that means we have quite a lot more scale for getting large scale changes done. And that's why we have a new sound engine and why we have, you know, memory improvements in this release, because we're improving our capabilities there. And those people are going to continue to work on overhauling stuff. You know, we're gonna work on compressing more of our data more so it loads even more quickly. We'll work on you know, frame rate improvements and upgrading the engine over time. As I've mentioned in the past, there is eventually a 64-bit version of Path of Exile coming, so people can take advantage of their 64-bit processors. You know, I'd love to have a DirectX 11 release sometime next year if the stars align, because, you know, that has a bunch of benefits.
I guess I have to say, in response to your original question, that there are you know, a good chunk of people out there that would enjoy more race seasons, even in its current form. But I know that, especially hearing that the stats are essentially falling, like player engagement is falling with the way racing currently is, that it might be more important to allocate time to bringing back racing heavily improved. But yeah, I'm not gonna suggest which decision you make on that one.
I could see. Oh, sorry, Chris.
We're happy with the racing numbers because we're not monetizing races in any way, right? The microtransactions are essentially non-functional in races, and the stash tabs don't help. And, you know, there's no core direct benefit for races being good or bad for us. It's entirely making the community have an awesome racing system. So we're happy with how many people are engaged in races. We just noted that the numbers are a lot higher when we've introduced new stuff. Like adding something like Descent or Descent Champions pumps the numbers up, and that's awesome. But if we just repeat systems that are basic, then we get the core races and no one else in them.
I could see the next race type. It's going to be like Labyrinth based. You know, you have like 2 sets of traps to go through, and then a bunch of monsters get your flash back, rinse and repeat. Oh my god, Endless Ledge trap version. Oh my god, the nightmare that would be, and the crying. Oh, we need it now.
I'm staying quiet here.
I tried, Chris. I keep trying. Always at the end of the episode.
So will this be something you potentially like poll the community for or something to get people's thoughts on about how they feel about doing more races in its current iteration versus holding off and doing some improvements?
Potentially, though, it's difficult to get fair representative polls. I mean, you have to make sure that everyone's got equal interest in it. And that's why we did one for the flashback event, because we didn't worry about the people who aren't participating. With the racing, we want to make sure that obviously a bunch of racers are going to vote in the polls. So we're going to say, yeah, bring racers back, even though 90% of the people aren't aware we have a website with polls on it, if you know what I mean. So those people weren't necessarily playing in the Parandus events, which is why we didn't care about their opinions. But we're going to do a lot of internal thinking about our schedule because we have a lot of stuff going on, and we'll make sure that we can at least clearly communicate what's happening with races. Like if we make the call, hey, look, for various reasons, there isn't another race season and we have to wait another 3 months. We want to say that early so people don't wait for something that isn't coming. I don't expect that's the answer. I'd like to run a season, but I'm just brain dumping all the relevant information here so you guys can understand it's not us trying to be bad here. It's us making sure to pragmatically weigh the various things we have to do.
I think that's the biggest thing. If you guys have clear communication with what your plans are with this next race season, I think people will be a lot happy with understanding where you guys are at. Because the biggest disappointment with the most recent race season was that we kind of just eventually found out there's not going to be a race season now. Like when we're like, when's the race season coming? Like it should be here already.
Yeah.
So,
well, we're
I look
considering
forward to some,
We're considering planning a schedule of those in advance and just committing to them, especially if we know our release dates. Like if we just said, hey, look, there's a race season in the last month of each league and we put out a calendar or something, that would be a great commitment, right? It'll be very clear it has to happen now, but then we want to make sure we have the resources to meet that before we actually pledge it.
Okay.
I think that concludes this whole episode. Chris, I want to thank you for coming by for the past 75 minutes. I know that Mondays are very busy for you over there and you got to get to a morning meeting. And I promise we won't harass you to come on another show anytime soon. Not until maybe next week. Or race
well, I'm happy to
season.
whenever. There's other staff members keen on coming on as well. Jonathan's expressed interest. I'm pretty sure it's good to have Carl on occasionally.
Wait, so you can
That's
actually give
a
up
valuable
Jonathan time?
podcast.
Yeah, Jonathan's keen. I'm sure the community have a lot of questions for him.
Yeah,
I think that's the next one. I'm going to have to harass him sometime. All right, well, thanks, Chris. And without further ado, thanks, guys, for tuning in. If you want to come to next week's episode, it'll be a week from today. We're going to have Yantor and Citizen, the Portuguese-Brazilian team, two big community members in the Portuguese market, and then we're going to have Vogelland, one of the biggest Taiwanese streamers, Taiwan #1. So we're going to have a international-style podcast where we're going to be asking them questions in English. They'll answer it in English and then ask the question to the community in the respective language and answer it in that language as well. So it's going to be a fun one. So without further ado, thanks for tuning in, guys. We're out.
Thank you so much, Chris. It was awesome.
Not a problem. Great to be here.